Hello, everybody. Thank you for watching my 2020 Town of Gilbert elections candidate interviews. Today, I have Highland Justice of the Peace candidate, Ken Sampson, with me. Ken is a licensed lawyer who has established a statewide military defense legal service, has worked in prosecution, has represented victims of domestic violence, and has worked in the federal immigration court. He's also a decorated member of the Arizona National Guard with over 2 decades of service. Thank you for allowing me to interview you today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me today.
So, like with all of my interviews, I want to give you the time to explain who you are and why you're running.
Sure. Well, you did a great job doing a little bit of my background. I'm originally from Colorado. I've been in the military for about a little over 22 years now. I first started out as a combat helicopter pilot and then went to law school and worked here in Arizona with the Judge Advocate General and with the Trial Defense Services, and then started branching out and doing my own thing. Um, I'm a husband. I'm a father. I've married my soulmate. We've got 7 kids together. Um, Pretty much that pretty much encapsulates what I do. I'm running for justice of the peace because I'm very passionate about the law, and I see the extension of being a judge as more of the community service or more of the service that I've provided before. It's just a different way for me to do it other than wearing a uniform all the time. So it's my passion for the law and making sure that people are treated equitably, and the experiences I've had in my litigative past that are able to help shape what I want to be and be able to hopefully contribute that to the community as well.
Awesome. So, my first question that I have for you is what is justice of the peace? Because that's not something that we hear that often unless you're getting married or planning
Right.
to and doing it civilly. But there's a lot more that goes into being justice of the peace. And also, what does being justice of the peace mean for you?
Sure. Well, that's a great question because it's funny you should mention that because when I first started talking with my wife about running for justice of the peace, she said, "You just want to spend time marrying people all day?" And there's a little bit more to it than that. Um, there, there's there's several courts in the state of Arizona or in the United States for that matter, and each court has its own responsibilities or things that it looks for. We've got the Arizona Supreme Court, we've got the Court of Appeals, Superior Courts, municipal courts, and we also have justice courts, and each court handles its own thing. A justice court is what's known as a limited has limited jurisdiction, which means it specializes in listening or hearing certain types of cases. Typically, those cases involve civil suits less than $10,000. It involves small claims actions, typically less than 3,500. It'll do domestic violence or orders of protection type issues. It might do civil and criminal traffic violations, as well as most predominantly what it's known for is for eviction actions or for landlord-tenant issues. There are other instances where the justice courts are used. Typically, it has a lot to do with the jurisdiction, because a justice court is a county seat; it's not a city seat. So anything that would fall within the jurisdiction of the county would typically be at a justice court as well. And interesting thing about justice courts is that the judges are the only judges that are elected. Everyone else in the state is appointed either through the town council or through the senate or through the governor. And so this is a great way for individuals to know exactly who is going to be their judge and to be a direct voice of the people rather than the politicians or the current status quo. And that's also important because about 30% of all courts or all cases go through justice court. So everybody knows who all the Supreme Court justices are, and they know a lot about what's going on at the national level. But you have a 30% chance before going before a justice of the peace here locally. So knowing who the candidates are and knowing their qualifications is extremely important.
Yeah, that is very interesting that this is the only position, the justice level, that does get voted into rather than appointed. Because usually when you go down the ballot and you're researching who your candidates are, when it comes to governor and even president, you're also looking not just who they are as a candidate, but who are they going to put on the bench. But
Yeah.
this time, the decision is ours.
That's right. And it's important, I think, to point out, too, is that because the state constitution requires this office to be an elected, the requirements to be a justice of the peace are actually quite low. You have to be 18 years old. You have to be a registered voter. You have to be able to read and speak the English language. And you have to live within the district or the precinct that you're going to be presiding in. And those are the only qualifications. So technically, anybody without a legal degree, without any legal background, if they're popular enough, can be elected as a judge.
That is very interesting. So, uh, my next question has to deal with what's going on right now in America, which is a
Hmm.
lot of protests demanding justice from a lot of young people like me, a lot of
Hmm.
people of color, also like me.
Right.
But I think a lot of the discussion is centered around police brutality and our police departments. But
Hmm.
by proxy, it also means our justice system is being put in question. And how is the justice system there to advocate for everyone rather than just a few? And as
Hmm.
a person who's worked with teen courts and has helped facilitate the Guadalupe Teen Court, I have seen the benefits that lower courts can do to help reduce recidivism and help communities. And that means communities with everybody involved. So, as Justice of the Peace, what do you plan on doing to address the inequality with our justice system and also carry on the the movement to help support everybody in Gilbert
Hmm.
in the Highland Precinct?
Sure. That's a great point that you bring up because, obviously someone who also has a little bit of courtroom experience, you can see the differences between good judges and you can see the differences between bad judges. And multiple cases that I've had, the good judges are the ones that treat everybody equitably. They would apply the law equally regardless of who they are. And the ones that are less effective are the ones that interject their own personal opinions into it. It's kind of a question between judicial activism and judicial restraint. And quite frankly, I've had some judges that are extremely left, like arm the homeless type left. But when you went to their court, everybody was going to be treated the same. And I think that in order for the courts to be able to address that, when you talk about inequalities in the justice system, it's those judges that are equally applying the law and making sure that everybody's been treated equitably. I think a note of caution is that we have to be careful that just because there's statistical anomalies, that's not necessarily indicative of a racist type system. There's a lot of things that go on because the justice courts, or courts in particular, they're the result of a very long chain of events, from the arrest to the prosecution to ultimately deciding what the sentencing is going to be. And anytime there's any evidence that there's any inequality or any injustice that's going on, it needs to be addressed immediately, and needs to strike while the iron is hot, and to make sure that either the judicial code of ethics in the state knows about it, or that individuals also know what they should be doing in order to make sure that the system is fair.
Mhm. So I do know that one of the things that the Justice of the Peace deals with is civil and criminal traffic violation.
Hmm.
Part of the continuation of the last question is that here in Arizona, African Americans, Hispanics, and Indigenous do get stopped more often, get stopped longer than our white counterparts.
Hmm.
Because those statistics do exist, what can the Justice of the Peace do when it comes to dealing with these kinds of civil and criminal violations?
Right. Well, and like I mentioned earlier, just because there's a statistical anomaly doesn't necessarily mean it's indicative of racism. There could be a lot of factors going on, you know, to why certain people are ticketed more than others. And well, quite frankly, that's not necessarily a judicial question, as far as that's more of a procedural question for the police, or things that the community really needs to address. More specifically to your question, what can the courts do to make sure that there's that bias? Again, goes back to my original thing about the equal treatment of everybody, because justice can be a very nebulous term. What might be just for you could be not just for me, you know. And so what we're talking about is making sure that justice is the same for everybody. Whether or not you, for example, the speeding ticket, you could be going 50 through a school zone, and you think that's not a big deal. So why should I have to pay this ticket, or why should I have to pay more insurance because of this infraction of the law? Where someone else might be able to go, well, that's kind of mean. That we shouldn't be speeding through school zones. They need to have the book thrown at them. They should be up in jail for up to 6 years. Both of those are extreme, but it just illustrates what difference that how justice could be applied or interpreted differently. So the best way to determine what justice actually is going to be is going to be able to apply the law fairly, and so that justice is what the law dictates, and not what a judge or what society would dictate that to be.
Kind of deviating from what's happening right now, because I definitely think that it is a bigger discussion, but I do believe that it is small steps. It is every single court system, every single police precinct needs to address inequity and every single person in their own individual lives. It's a bigger issue, but it also has smaller implications as well. But going outside of that, I want to talk about how part of the JP's job is to talk about issues of harassment, orders of protection. And I know you have experience in working with victims of domestic violence. So what does that experience bring to you if you do get put on the bench to be the justice of the peace?
The orders of protection are very interesting, the things that the court issues. Basically, you're telling two people that they can't talk or speak to each other for a certain period of time, typically up to a year. And there are some restraints that can be given on the person that's the offender, or the person that is causing the harassment, up into them not being able to have firearms. So there are some serious constitutional issues that are raised when you have these orders of protection. On the other side, you have people that are being victimized. You have people that are being harassed, or they're being abused, or they're being subject to all different kinds of things. And the important thing for a judge, especially when it comes to issues of domestic violence, is you don't listen to your heart as much as you listen to what the facts are, because this is a system that can be very easily abused. If you and I are in an argument and you went to court and said, "Hey, I don't like what Ken said," the court could file an injunction against harassment if it didn't have the basis to do so. And one of the other things that makes these orders of protection or injunctions against harassment interesting is that it's a single party hearing at the beginning, so both parties aren't present. It's only until typically 14 days later when the other person is able to come to court and say their portion of the case. So in order to effectuate that, you need to make sure that an effective judge in these cases needs to really listen to what the individual's communicating, or really listen to what it is, because a lot of people that come before for issues of domestic violence will do it themselves and typically aren't represented by an attorney. So they don't have the background or the knowledge in order to express exactly what it is they're looking for. And obviously, in a court of law, you need to make sure that you're very specific and that you're outlining things as well. When I was working when I was in law school, and I was working in the domestic violence clinic, again, some very effective judges say, "I understand what you're saying, but the information you're presenting me isn't sufficient enough to issue a restraining order. However, if you can come back and you can demonstrate some of these things, I have no problem being able to provide that order." Sometimes the person could come back with like an hour with either text messages or voicemail or pictures or something. And other times you could tell they were trying to take advantage of the system. They didn't like that their boyfriend was hanging around the same coffee shop that they were, and so they were trying to get an order of protection. So that's a very long answer to how, as a justice of the peace, and when you're dealing with orders of protection and injunctions against harassment, it's the presentation of the evidence. It's the understanding of the situation of where the individual filing the order of protection is coming from, and making sure that it fits within the law that's prescribed.
Mm-hmm. I think that brings up an interesting question about how a lot of people don't have a lot of legal education. Granted, it's a pretty difficult career, but what that makes me think is that when people come to the justice court, they are uninformed. And
Mm-hmm.
so how, as justice of the peace, will you take on, I guess, the difficult issue of helping people become more informed on the legal system? Because I
Mm-hmm.
know we have a right to an attorney.
Sure.
But in civil cases, we don't get an appointed attorney to help us
Mm-hmm.
out.
Right. Well, fortunately, in justice courts, typically the cases are a little bit more smaller. You tell that to somebody who's got 3,000, 500 in their pocket, or 10,000 they can spend. But typically they're a lot smaller. And because, for example, small claims issues, attorneys are not allowed to represent clients. It's basically you're sitting down and you're mediating and trying to figure out exactly what the issue is. The state Supreme Court, for its part, and the Superior Court in Maricopa County, do a fantastic job of providing resources for individuals in order to get that background that they need before they even come to court. Whether it's their self-help centers, or a lot of times they'll do basically seminars, for lack of a better word, about tenant landlord issues and things like that, and and conflict resolution. Those are great tools for even, folks that haven't been to law school or are looking for the legal tools that they need to be effective in court. That would be my first recommendation. But also, again, going back to uh, helping people understand and apply the law. Some of the best judges that I've ever seen are the ones that not only treated everybody fairly, but the people knew that the litigants knew what was going on in court. I've seen people sentenced to life in prison who walked out not happy they were sentenced to life in prison, but know they were being treated fairly by the court. And part of that also means that you're explaining a little bit of why you're doing or what your thought process is along those lines. Because you could come up to me and say, my dog's barking, and I'm like, well, that's too bad. You're just going to have to, tough it out. And you're going to be like, well, this guy has no idea. I'm not communicating effectively. But again, an effective judge would be like, okay, let's unpack that a little bit. What do you mean that this dog is barking too much? And being able to help people understand a little bit more about, ordinances, about noise and things like that, and things that can be contributed to small claims issues, or even in civil or traffic court, things like that. It's the education, or explaining a little bit of the thought process, and not so much that you're trying to talk down to people, but that you're trying to communicate effectively what it is that you as a judge are thinking. And by doing so, that's allowing the individuals in court to have a much more a greater understanding of what's going through the judge's mind and his thought process.
Similar to that, it is my belief that young people need to be involved in every single aspect of our government, whether that's from the legislature, justice system, executive. We need to get involved. We need to get informed, and even the smallest court, the justice of the peace, justice courts need to have youth involvement. So, what does youth involvement look with you if you were elected as the justice of the peace?
Things are a little bit different now, as far as with the COVID situation. But going to court and just sitting there and listening, it's a public forum. Anybody's welcome to come and listen and hear what's going on in the court. That's a great opportunity for youth to kind of understand and know what the justice court is about. Also, I'm very much an advocate for making sure that there's opportunities for people to learn, whether that's internships within the justice court, or even law school students that are able to clerk or help the justice courts be able to make those decisions. I've had great opportunities working for judges, but none of those were in the justice courts. And I'd like to see those opportunities extended to the youth, and to allow people as young as high school an opportunity to come in, work in the office, see how things are, and be able to learn and share those experiences, not only for themselves, but maybe we'll have another lawyer or another judge come out of those programs in order to, so that the youth can get a greater exposure. Because I think the more people understand the role of the justice court, the more that, I guess, the greater credibility that is given to the justice court. And you're right, it starts with the youth. It starts with people that are trying to build and trying to understand their world and being able to be part of it.
I definitely think I probably would have jumped on that opportunity back when I was in high school. I was involved with the Guadalupe Teen Court Club, and that was a great way to get exposure to the judicial system and what that means, reducing recidivism. That's something that I became passionate about from learning about the justice system when I was a freshman. And reducing recidivism has been probably my number one goal in my life to advocate for. So I guess that also leads me to my next question about what does the justice court play a role when it comes to the reduction of recidivism?
Well, that's a good question. And I really don't know if there's anything specifically that can be done in court to reduce recidivism. What you're talking about is, I think that's more of a function of society. I think that's what happens outside the court system itself. You can kind of think of a court system as, information in, information out. You could sit there and say, well, stronger sentences for crime would help reduce that. That's not necessarily true. It's not good. Again, we go back to what the concept of individual justice is. And at the same time, we can't say we got to be lenient on sentences, because what does that teach? I'm going to come back to court. I'm going to get my hands slapped. I think when it comes to reducing those types of things, that's a little bit outside of the scope of the judiciary. I think what that does is, when we're talking about reducing recidivism, if I can talk tonight, it has a lot to do with the way that society wants to work with that. I think it has a lot more to do with how the probation officers are working with people that are on probation, and more importantly, when we're talking about the law enforcement, how they're making sure that that's being distributed equally and fairly among everybody. So you're going to have career criminals. Now, that's just the way that society works. But the important thing is to make sure that we're gleaning out those individuals that are just part of that are just made a bad choice, and that they're trying to get their lives together. When I was working in the Mesa prosecutor's office, I saw that quite a bit, where you would have people for whatever reason, for trespassing or public intoxication, good, upstanding people that either made a bad decision or in the wrong place at the wrong time. But those people I never saw again as a prosecutor. Those were the individuals that knew that they had messed up. They either paid their fine or they made their appearance, and then they went on with their life. And I think that's kind of the best way to go, is that individuals see what they've done, they identify the wrongdoing, and they don't do it anymore. And then we make sure that people aren't coming back to court, just particularly for the same things again.
So, speaking to my experience with teen court and seeing how my favorite statistic when I pitch teen court for
Hmm.
young people interested is that specifically the program in Maricopa County has been able to reduce recidivism by 96%. That is pretty awesome. It's,
Right.
um, and it just makes me happy knowing that I'm a part of that.
Hmm.
And it is because the program is primarily rooted in restorative justice. So, at least from my personal standpoint, I do see that the justice system, whether it's the lowest court that you can go to all the way up to the Supreme Court, I guess you can't see my
Hmm.
hands.
Right. No, I got you.
Imagine that the disparity between my hands are larger.
Right. Right.
um, does have a role in when it comes to reducing recidivism, because I guess you can say, when we first charge a criminal or cite a violation, or say like this is what you have to do to repair what you've done, whether
Hmm.
that's through a penal system, that action has leads up to consequences. And there is research in saying that restorative justice has an ability to have benefits, especially in misdemeanor cases. Is that something that you would look towards to helping our community not have crime increased in our beautiful Gilbert?
Right. Well, absolutely. I think with and I think teen court's a great example. Another court I can think of is veterans court, where there are specialized courts that are dealing with a specific class of people, whether they're doing, and dealing with whatever issues they are. For example, with veterans court, a lot of times people make sure that they're getting the counseling that they need, or that they're getting if there's any treatments for PTSD or anything, or going to the root of why these crimes are being committed. Um, and I think that this kind of goes back to what I was saying a little bit earlier. Like within teen courts and veterans court, it's a community thing. It's not just the judge sitting there making or trying to develop these plans. You have counselors, you have attorneys, you have members of the community that are helping with that. And I think that that's the key. Absolutely. More to your question about whether or not those things are important. Absolutely. And if anybody wants to initiate those types of things, or to make sure that we're working to working to make sure that um, the defendant is not going to be causing the same thing again, that's fantastic. I mean, that's a win for everybody, because judges don't want to see the same people every day, and people don't want to be in court at the same time, and it allows for a greater community outreach, and it allows for people to not avoid being in court over and over again.
And it's important to remember that you are a member of the community, and if you get elected, you'll still be a member of the community. So it impacts everybody. It impacts us as individuals who are Gilbert residents. What does that mean when we have people continuously having crime, and for
Hmm.
what reasons? Because I think um, it's not just a clear answer. It's not
Right.
they just want to commit crime again. It's not that. There are so many different. Everybody's an individual. Everybody has reasons, valid or not, and it's important to address them. And it's
Right.
really hard to have this conversation and generalize, because every situation, every case is so
Right.
so different. Every defendant.
Exactly. And one of the, if I could add, one of the things that makes Arizona courts unique, there's not only in Arizona, but in our justice system here, is that a lot of the courts are considered problem-solving courts, and so the judges have access to a lot of other resources when it comes to determining sentences and determining sentencing guidelines and everything else, because because of that status. One of the things that I think of in juvenile court is when you have guardian ad litem appointed, or you have conservators, or you have individuals that are helping representing the litigants at trial, and they are able to provide that input and their observations to the court. And I think that that's a wonderful thing, and it's very unique for our courts because those are available to the judge. And typically, they might be able to consider things that wouldn't typically be excluded to normal evidentiary procedure. So, and that goes, I think, it goes back to what you're saying about, it's different for everybody, and the judge has the ability to look at things differently for each individual, but make sure that they're being treated fairly.
I think it's a little hard to have conversations when it comes to talking about the justice system. It is,
Hmm.
to me, it is one of the most elusive parts of our government, any level of justice, because it's also so nuanced and depending on these cases. But it's one of the most important. I mean, I guess it's hard to rank which one's the most
Right?
important because we have checks and balances. They're all supposed to
Sure.
be equal. But it's our, like, it's our silent branch of government.
Hmm.
It's there, and it's there to help us. It has impacted everybody's lives. Um, so I think I'm almost done with all my questions, but
Hmm.
I have a more fun question. What
Sure.
has been the most impactful moment of your life that has led you to where you are now?
Whew, that is a good question. Are you talking just in life in general, or are you
In life,
talking the courtroom?
you can answer it. You can interpret the question how you want to.
I'll give you one of each then, because I think that there's two very, I think, bedrock moments where I thought, kind of changed the way that I looked at things. Where I thought, this is really worth it. Um, One was when I was a helicopter pilot. It's a very type A personality type environment, and there's a lot of strong-willed people, and they're going back and forth. And we used to have a saying that you can shake your hand at the hurricane, but it's still coming. In other words, you can, this thing you're not is going to be an unpleasant experience, is going to be approaching, and you can shake your fist at it, but no matter what, you're going to have to endure whatever goes on. And well, at the time, she was like my 8-year-old daughter. She also has high functioning autism, and I did something. I told her to do something that I don't remember what it was. I cleaned her room or something, and she says, and she, she wasn't very happy with it. I'm like, hey, you can shake your fist at the hurricane, but it's still going to come. And she looked at me and she goes, yeah, but you can still fly a kite. And I thought, that's amazing. That's amazing depth for someone as young as she was, to say that even though you could either be angry, or you could weather the storm, but you can be enjoying yourself as well. And that really shaped a lot of my outlook. That my kid would be able to have that kind of perspective. On the legal side, one of the most satisfying cases that I was able to work with was actually an injunction harassment against a harassment case, and it was more formally, it was an order of protection. And this was an individual who had endured great abuses throughout her marriage, and the husband was not a good guy, and she had tried to do many things on her own in order to get him to stop doing what he was doing. They weren't even married anymore, but he was still doing very underhanded, very cruel, very manipulative things, including strangling their cat. This was not a good guy. And she came to the law clinic very broken, broken in spirit, broken in thought, and just basically helpless. And I was able to sit down with her, and we were able to talk about her case. And then 2 days later, we were sitting there in the Phoenix Municipal Court, and I was able to present the case. I was able to explain exactly to the judge what was going on, and the judge immediately issued that order of protection, and basically isolated her from this guy for at least a year. I'm sure she probably went back again and got a renewal later on. But as the judge was passing the sentence and issuing the order of protection, the amount of relief and the tears that welled up in her eyes, she looked up at me and she's like, thank you. Thank you so much for doing what it is that you did, so that me and my kids can have some peace. As the police and everybody were working through the case as well. And that, at that moment, I'm like, now I know I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. that this is this is something, this is almost like a higher calling, if you will, that I'm able to have this education and this training, and to be able to turn back to the community and really make a difference. And so those two things, I think, together are the things that would matter the most, or the things that would help change or mean the most to me.
Those are wonderful, wonderful stories, and you have a very, very intelligent daughter.
Yeah, very much, yes.
It reminds me of just quite a few times in my life, something has gone wrong and beyond my control. And a person would say to me, "Well, Danny, life's not fair." And I would say, "Yeah, but you have the ability to make it fair, so why don't you?"
Hmm.
I think that's a good thing to take with the justice system when making decisions in justice. Life isn't fair. Things are going to happen. You make
Right.
a mistake, you got to go to court, but you also have positions in your everyday life. If you get appointed to be justice of the peace, as individuals, as community members, we all have an ability to make life a little bit more fair. So why
Hmm.
don't we?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well said.
So I want to thank you again for taking some time to speak with me and the young voters in Gilbert. It's a very, very important but not very well known position, justice of the peace. So do you have any final things you want to say before we end this interview?
No, well, I'm an attorney, so I've always got something to say. And but it has, it's been a great experience talking with you. And the more that people learn about the justice courts, I think the more they're going to see how important it is, or what a fundamental role it plays in their community. Um, and again, it's my passion, my desire for law, and to give back to the community is why I want to be elected as a justice of the peace. I'm always open to talking with anybody about my background, about my credentials, or even just about the justice courts in particular. Individuals can reach me at my website. It's at samsonjp.com. They can also email me directly, which is ken@samsonjp.com. And I always love to talk, and I think the community outreach is the most important part of my campaign. Um, and if anybody wants to find out a little bit more, they're more than willing, and I'd be more than happy to talk with them.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So that was Ken Sampson, who is running for Justice of the Peace for the Highland District. If you want to find out more information, all of those links that he mentioned and his social media, it's going to be down below in the description. I put those links there. And if you want to find out more about me and my efforts to increase youth civic engagement here in Gilbert, you can check out those links too. See you next time.
Yeah. Thank you very much.